This, I thought as I took a deep breath of the summer air, filled with the smells of trees, water, and sunshine, was one of those things that you never experience when living in a big city. I looked at the shore and realized that a beautiful young woman sitting on the beach sunbathing naked was another rarity in city life. Life at the dacha was good. My wife Lisa and I have lived in the city for almost 20 years, since we first got together before we got married. It suited us and our lives. We both had pretty good jobs that make decent money. She worked for a consulting company and often traveled for work. I, on the other hand, worked as an executive for a grocery store chain. I can't say I loved my job, but I loved solving problems, and over the years I rose through the ranks. We didn't have children. We discussed this before we decided to get married 15 years ago. We loved our lives and wanted to focus on our careers and ourselves. For a while, we checked from time to see if everything was still going well for us. We never wavered in this decision, and my wife ended up getting her tubes tied. I was supposed to get a vasectomy too, but we never got around to it. It didn't seem important since we weren't sleeping with other people anyway. We were lucky that we were still attracted to each other. My wife was blonde, 2 inches shorter than me, 5'8". She had an athletic build, which she maintained by going to the gym. Her breasts weren't too big, just larger than a C-cup, but that meant they were well maintained over time. They were as elastic and pleasant as on the first day. I was also blonde, with pale blue eyes and a full beard that was just starting to turn gray. I had naturally broad shoulders, and although I was a little softer around the waist than I used to be, the six-pack of my youth was long gone. I ran a couple of times a week and stayed active, which kept me in good shape. Our sex life was always good, but over time it ceased to be the central point of our relationship. After 15 years of marriage and almost 20 years of living together, we had sex several times a month. We both worked a lot, and Lisa traveled often for work. I tried not to be offended by the decrease in activity. Her sexual desire seemed to decrease over time, while mine remained stable or even increased. However, we were best friends, and I knew how to take care of myself, which I did at least once a day. It's weird how different your life is when you decide not to have kids. My wife and I bought our apartment in the city center when prices were still reasonable and settled into a very urban lifestyle. As our salaries increased, we enjoyed life more. We often went to the cinema, had drinks or dinner a couple of times a week, or attended concerts and shows. Our friends eventually had children, bought houses in the suburbs, and disappeared from our lives. Every time this happened, the couple swore that they would be the exception and maintain the same lifestyle. This never happened, and we watched with regret, but humility, as they disappeared from our lives. We had a small group of like-minded people, usually much younger than us, with whom we spent time. Lisa, to be honest, more than me. She always socialized more and made friends. Our apartment was located in the very center of the city, in a fashionable area. There were plenty of bars and restaurants around, and we both worked within walking distance of our home. The only nature, however, was a small park where locals walked their dogs. The building in which we bought the apartment was an old warehouse, converted into housing, and it was gorgeous, with antique wooden floors covered in scratches and red brick walls. We furnished it in a mid-century style and lived the urban life we dreamed of as a child, living in the middle of nowhere. The only drawback was the complete lack of nature. This didn't bother Lisa as much as it did me. I grew up camping, hiking, and spending time outdoors. This was really important to me. Lisa, on the other hand, hated being outside. In the end, we found a compromise. In the winter, we went to a resort in Mexico, and in the summer, we rented a house on a lake near our city. We always rented the same house. It was about 2 hours from the city, owned by an elderly couple who had long ago built 5 houses on a small peninsula that jutted out into a clear lake. It had a small, semi-private beach. It was relatively comfortable and always clean. It was not a resort in the sense that we visited in winter. There were no buffets or even restaurants. Each cabin was surrounded by a small grove of trees for privacy, and each had its own kitchen, and we brought our own food and drinks. Each cabin had its own fire pit, and there was one larger, communal one in the center of the building complex, where we could socialize with other tenants in the evenings if we wanted. One of the few amenities of this place was a small dock where several canoes, a couple of kayaks, paddles, and life jackets were provided free of charge. This was my favorite aspect. I've always loved paddling, especially kayaking, but it didn't make sense to have my own. When we stayed in the house, every day Lisa sat on the small beach, sunbathed and read books, and I took a kayak and swam, exploring the shores of the lake. It was hot that week in August. Neither Lisa nor I complained. Over the years, we have had disappointing weeks where the weather wasn't warm or it rained all week, and it felt like the trip had been wasted. The forecast for this week, however, was for very high temperatures during the day and continuous sunshine. I was already sweating as I unloaded our small BMW SUV. I was wearing shorts and a tank top, flip-flops, and a slightly funny straw fedora to protect myself from the sun. I was in vacation mode. Lisa helped by putting everything away and getting us ready to just relax for the rest of the week. It was Sunday afternoon. We both took the day off for the trip and will be staying here until next Sunday, 7 full days of lake vacation. We weren't the only ones to arrive, and I nodded to the car that passed me as I grabbed the last of the bags from the car. It was a Honda Civic, driven by a young man wearing mirrored glasses. I didn't like the sound of his muffler and hoped he wouldn't drive in the evenings. The young woman next to him, as far as I could see, looked quite nice, but it was hard to tell. She was wearing large sunglasses and a scarf tied around her hair. The man driving either didn't notice me or ignored me. "Fuck you too," I muttered under my breath. I brought the rest inside and started preparing dinner. We had a long day and wanted to relax the rest of the evening. I had a couple of beers and my wife had some wine while we watched a movie on a streaming service on my laptop. Wi-Fi, the wonders of modern rental houses. That night, after we got into bed, I turned to my wife and hugged her. I was already semi-horny and thought we could play a little. "I'm so glad we're finally here," I said, kissing her neck. "Me too, Grant. I can't wait to read and nap in the sun, and you can go on your boating adventures," she said. I could tell from the tone of her voice that she was smiling. "Kayak," I corrected. "So, do you want?" She sighed. "If you really want to, but I'm pretty tired. Do you mind if we don't go today?" she said apologetically. I sighed too, but tried not to show offense. "Yes," I said. "That's okay. Maybe tomorrow." I turned over on my side and lay on my back. "Tomorrow for sure," she said and kissed me. "Good night, dear." "Yeah, good night." The next morning I made us breakfast and coffee, and we sat on the small covered veranda off the kitchen. Neither of us were early risers by nature, and the sun was already high when we woke up. It was about 11 a.m. when we finished, and I washed the dishes. Our cabin faced west towards the lake, so the sunrise view wasn't that special. But that night, when the sun goes down, it will be wonderful. Lisa packed her beach chair, a large bottle of water, a blanket, and a book, and was ready for a day at the beach. I put on my swimming trunks, pulled on my tank top, and got ready for a few hours on the water. "It's very hot today," Lisa warned me. "Don't forget the sunscreen and reapply it. You don't want to get sunburned. And take water. Stay hydrated." I loaded up and headed to the dock. At this point, the boats and kayaks were always well maintained, and I was quickly on the water, gliding along the calm surface as I headed out to explore the lake. The lake was not very large, but it was fed by a wide river, which I sometimes floated on during my rowing trips. What I especially liked was that its shores were very rugged with many small, secluded coves and bays. Most of the land around the lake was owned by a logging company that had not logged in many years, so there were very few cabins except those on the peninsula where we rented a cabin. This meant that I rarely had to run into other people, especially motorboats or jet skis. I moved along the western shore of the lake to a very secluded cove that I knew. It was almost hidden by thick trees, visible only from the water directly in front of it, and had a small sandy beach. I would often paddle there on hot days to swim on the beach and enjoy the day. A hot, sunny day like this was perfect for this. As I rounded the shore, my oars carrying me forward almost silently, I frowned. I saw the forest green color of a canoe stretched out on my beach and someone lying on the sand. I knew I had no special rights to this pirate bay, but I always thought of it as my own secret place. It was unpleasant, but I realized that I had no special rights to this place, so I tried to suppress this feeling. I also wasn't going to let someone else drive me away. I continued paddling towards the beach. Out of politeness, I lightly slapped my oar into the water. The sound was loud on the calm lake and echoed through the water. I didn't want to scare the man on the beach. When the pop sounded, the figure on the sand sat down, shielding its eyes from the sun overhead, and looked at me on the water. I raised my hand in greeting, letting the momentum continue to carry me towards the shore. The figure on the beach raised his hand in response. As I got closer, I was able to get a better look at the person I was approaching. It was clearly a woman, most obviously due to the fact that she was topless. I felt awkward, mostly because I assumed it would embarrass her. I didn't want to invade someone else's space, especially if the person was naked. I really didn't want to seem like a horny pervert. I thought it might be better to just wave and continue on my way to the other side of the shore, but the woman screamed. "Hello!" Her voice echoed across the water, seemingly louder than it should have been. I sighed. Would it be weird if I just sailed away? It seemed to me that yes. My hesitation disappeared when I saw her wearing a cape over her naked top. I sighed and continued rowing towards the bay. "Hey," I called back as I got closer and let my kayak slide onto the sand of the beach. I grabbed the rope at the bow of the small, maneuverable boat and pulled it far enough onto the sand to prevent it from floating away. I was about 10 feet away from the woman. I was finally able to get a good look at her. She was sitting on a blanket, which she spread next to a green canoe. Her legs were stretched out in front of her, smooth and slightly tanned. My eyes went up. She was wearing a green bikini. They weren't modest, covering only half of her ass, but they weren't too provocative either. Her stomach was flat but soft, with a single fold at her navel as she sat with her hands behind her back. She put on a light cape made of thin white material. She had a belt that was not tied, and although it covered her breasts, it was open at the front, showing the inner curves of each breast. My eyes continued to move upwards and met her face. It was framed by thick curly brown hair that fell just below his shoulders. Her face was oval, with plump pink lips that were dark pink in color. She smiled slightly, and cute dimples appeared on her cheeks. Her eyes were bright green, under her high arched eyebrows. She looked at me with a slight mockery. I shook my head slightly, realizing that I was staring at a young woman. Just like that, I didn't want to seem like a lustful pervert. I was about to apologize and awkwardly leave when she patted the blanket next to her. "Have a seat," she said. "I didn't expect anyone else to come here." I hesitated only a moment before taking a few steps and sitting on the very edge of the blanket, a few feet away from her. "Thank you," I said. "I thought the same thing. I've been coming here for years, and this is the first time anyone else has been here. My name is Grant, by the way." I extended my hand to her, and she took it. Her hand was soft and small in mine, but she had a decent handshake. "Hi, Grant," she said. "I'm Millie." She looked around the quiet bay. "Many years, huh?" she said. "Well, then this place is more yours than mine. I'll call it Grant's Cove. Do you mind if I come here sometimes, since this is your place?" She smiled at me. I laughed. "It's definitely not mine," I said. "I wish I could. It would be nice to build a little house in the trees above. But I'm only renting a place on the lake, so do what you want." "Oh," she said, nodding. "I think I saw you yesterday. When did we arrive? You were unloading your car." I realized it was the girl in the loud car I saw yesterday. I realized it was the girl in the loud car I saw yesterday. I think it could have been me. "Were you in a noisy car with a guy?" She shook her head, slightly annoyed. "Sorry about that. I hate Marty's car. This is so embarrassing." I shrugged. "Well," I said, "I had less respectable cars when I was young too. Marty, is that your husband?" She laughed. How old do you think I am? Husband? I'm only 20. He's my boyfriend. We've only been together for about 6 months. I must look terrible. I quickly shook my head. No, I mean, I hesitated. I didn't mean to say that. You're beautiful, of course. I mean, beautiful, she said in a teasing tone. You're very kind, Grant. Crap. I was acting so strangely. Sorry, I didn't mean to say it like that. I said, still a little embarrassed. So I was 27 when I married Lisa. She raised an eyebrow. I won't ask what you wanted to say, I think. She was still teasing me. So how many years have you been married? Oh, I said, for about 15 years now. We recently celebrated our big anniversary. She thought for a moment. So you're 42? I nodded in response. About the same age as my father. My parents were pretty young when they got me. I see, I said, not knowing what to say to that. What is it like, she asked, to be married for so long? It's hard to imagine. I can't find anyone with whom I could last more than 6 months. I thought for a moment. That's good, I said. Like, well, when you've been together for so long, you really get to know each other. You go through a lot of hardships, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of times when it seems like it's impossible to be together anymore, but we've always found a way through and become stronger. I think if you have similar goals and understand each other, it leads to a great, deep connection that really can't be beat. I cleared my throat. I felt a little awkward talking about this with an almost stranger. It feels good, she said, leaning back on her elbows, turning her head back so the sunlight hit her face. Her eyes were closed, and I couldn't help but run my eyes over her body again. Even though I talked about a good marriage, at that moment I was not acting the way a husband should. Well, she said, maybe someday for me. She lay down on her back, shielding her eyes from the sun. I sat down and took a sip of water from my bottle. It was nice to meet you, I said, but if you want to be alone, I can leave. I feel awkward intruding on your time. She shook her head. No, she said. Stay. I don't mind. I'm not a loner, and I like the company. Unless you want to leave, should you go back to your wife? No, I said. I usually spend the whole day at the lake. She'd probably be annoyed if I came back now and interrupted her reading time. What about what's his name? Marty, do you need to get back to him? No, she said. He uses Wi-Fi to work. He's on a working holiday, which I guess isn't much of a vacation. He doesn't need me around during the day. She turned on her side and lay looking at me. Her cape shifted, but somehow continued to cover most of her chest. We have no obligations, she said, so let's just chat, if you don't mind. I didn't mind at all. We spent a few hours on that beach that day chatting. Looking back, I can't easily say what was discussed. Nothing deep or important, but it was an easy, comfortable conversation. I learned that Millie was at university trying to figure out life. She wasn't sure what she wanted to do in life. Meanwhile, she worked in the evenings as a bartender, happy with the tips, but tired of the men who pestered her. She grew up in the city, and it turned out that she and Marty rented a condo just a few blocks from where my wife and I lived. I must say that communicating with a beautiful young woman was incredibly pleasant. I understood that this was only happening because I was there. She probably would have started this conversation with anyone who showed up in my place, but it was still nice. It certainly flattered my vanity that such a young and attractive girl actually listened to me while I spoke. As for me, I answered Millie's questions when she asked them. I talked a little about the travel I did in my youth. I talked about my time studying, and we compared how different our experiences were. All in all, it was a wonderful day that flew by almost unnoticed. It only dawned on me a few hours later that the light had noticeably changed. I looked at my watch and muttered. Damn, I said. We've been here for about 4 hours. I didn't even notice. She smiled. Well, when you have good company, time flies. That's for sure, I said. It was really great, but I think it's time for me. And how are you? I stood up and looked around so as not to forget my things. She sighed. Yes, she said. I think it's time for me too. She also stood up, quickly came up to me and hugged me. I didn't expect this and tensed up, but then I relaxed and hugged her back. Her body was pressed against me. I felt her breasts through the fabric of my t-shirt and her cape. It wasn't a sexual hug, although my thoughts immediately went there, more like a hug from an old friend. I'm a hugger, she said. Sorry. You do not mind? No, I said. Hugs are good. Thank you for spending time with me, Grant, she said, looking at me with her bright green eyes. It was fun. She walked away and began to collect her things. Do you want to get back together? I asked. She looked at me and bit her plump bottom lip, then shook her head. No, she said. I think it's better to go our separate ways, otherwise people might think we spent the day together and draw the wrong conclusions. It's better for me to leave a little later than you and return separately. I was a little puzzled. I believe, I said, but it's not. I mean, nothing happened. Certainly, but she hesitated. However, it will probably be better if we arrive separately, and if you don't mind, let's keep it a secret, please. I nodded slowly. Well, of course, I said, if you want so. To be honest, now that I think about it, Lisa might not be too happy to know that I spent the day with Millie. Millie smiled widely. Great, she said. So this will be our secret. It's nice to share secrets, isn't it? I got into the kayak and pushed off the sand, ready to set off. I'll be here tomorrow too, she shouted to me. See you? I nodded and waved at her, then swam back to the resort. It's been a long trip, Lisa said when I returned to the cabin. She was sitting on the sand in a low chair with a book on her lap and a small refrigerator with soda and beer next to it. I grabbed one cold beer and broke it, taking a deep sip. It was strange for me to keep my visit to Millie a secret, but I did as the young woman asked me and did not tell my wife about it. I think so, I said. This year I decided to go on longer trips. I only get to go out on the water while we're here, and I think I'd like to make the most of it. She nodded and opened the book again. I want to finish this chapter before I come. Why don't you take a shower before we head into town for dinner? I nodded and did just that. Not far from the cottage, there was a small town. Only a few hundred residents lived here year-round, but in the summer, it really came to life. Those who lived there seemed to revolve their work around people like us who came on vacation. This meant there were some decent restaurants and a pub. Lisa and I went there several times a week when we stayed at the cottage for food or drink or both. That evening, we chose a small Italian place and had a decent dinner with a few glasses of wine. I tried not to drink too much so that I could drive us home. Lisa hated driving on rural roads at night. We were home around 10:30. We were both pretty exhausted and decided to go to bed. Spending the day in the sun, even if you didn't do much, seemed to have the same effect on you. When we went to bed, my wife turned to me and kissed me. So, she said, smiling in the darkness, are we going to play tonight? I didn't say anything, but rolled on top of her, kissing her back. We made long, slow love. I hate to admit it, but around this time I forgot about my experience with my wife. My mind's eye conjured up an image of the young woman I had met earlier that day. I saw her plump lips and remembered how she lightly licked them before speaking. I rolled onto my side, gasping for breath. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, angry at myself for imagining another woman while I made love to my wife. Lisa kissed me on the cheek and went to the bathroom to clean up. She returned a few minutes later, and within minutes she was fast asleep. I lay awake, conflicted. Of course, imagining someone else was harmless, but for some reason it didn't feel right. I was wondering if I should skip the kayak trip the next day or at least go in a different direction. It took me a while to fall asleep. Millie was waiting for me in our little cove when I arrived on her next day around 10:30 am. When I woke up, I decided not to miss our visit. In the light of the morning, I cast aside all the fears I had had the night before. A little imagination, I reasoned, was harmless. As harmless as a conversation on the shore of a lake. She waved when she saw me, and I waved back. She pulled the canoe out of the water again and sat down on the blanket. She was wearing her bikini bottoms again, this time orange, and had the same blanket over her shoulders. It was tied at the waist with a belt, but was open all the way down to her torso, revealing the inner curves of her breasts. I pulled my kayak ashore, walked over to her blanket, and sat down. This time I didn't sit on the very edge like the day before, leaving about 3 feet between us. "Hi, Millie," I said. "How was your evening?" She looked at me and smiled. A curse. She was very, very beautiful. "I think everything was fine," she said. Then she frowned. "Not really. It is not true. It was pretty shitty. Marty and I got into a fight. Stupidity means absolutely nothing. So it wasn't great." She sighed and smiled at me again. "But I'm glad you're here. I had a really great day yesterday." "Me too," I said, sitting down next to her. "Excellent day. Didn't get into a fight. Sorry to hear that." "I think it's okay." She said, "That happens. So, what did you do last night?" "Oh," I said, "not too much. Went into town for dinner, and then came back and went to bed quite early." "Yeah," she said with a slight teasing smirk. "What a score." I chuckled. It was a bit of an odd question from someone I didn't know that well. "Actually," I said, "I did it." I felt a brief pang of regret as I thought about how I imagined her to be when I had sex with my wife. "Okay," she said. "I would like to. They talk about make-up sex, but I can't imagine having sex with Marty after our fight. Then I won't be able to have sex. He's an asshole, and I'm left to please myself in the living room while he showers. How is that fair?" "Yes," I said. "This sucks." She was laughing. "Sorry, too much information. Don't hate me. It's okay," I said soothingly. "Remember, I'm an old man. I heard and saw it all." "You're not that old," she said, "but thank you. I don't have many people to talk to right now." We sat back and relaxed, chatting quietly. It was very comfortable spending time with Millie. It's been a while since I communicated with anyone so quickly. It was very hot that day. As the sun continued to rise, the temperature also rose. Soon I felt beads of sweat running down my skin and felt the tank top I was wearing stick to my chest and back. Sweat glistened on Millie's forehead. Finally, after about an hour, she sat down. "Screw this," she said. "I can't stand it anymore. I'm too hot. Would it be weird if I took off this cover? I don't usually sit in the sun wearing a top." I swallowed. Of course, I would be glad if she deleted it. Still, I knew it was completely wrong for me to sit there and stare at her. "If it's more convenient for you," I said, "do what you want. I don't want you to suffer. I'll try to behave like a gentleman. I'll turn away." She grinned. "Thank you," she said, and quickly unfastened her belt. She stopped and, looking at me out of the corner of her eye, began to slowly spread both sides, exposing her breasts. I did as I promised and deliberately turned away. I wonder if I saw a glimmer of disappointment in her eyes when I looked away. Not likely, I thought. I imagined it. She started talking again about this dog she had when she was younger, and I looked back at her, trying to look her in the eyes and not let my gaze wander to her chest. I nodded at her story, but to be honest, most of it went in one ear and out the other. After a couple of moments, she stopped. "Okay," she said, "it won't work." "What do you have in mind?" I asked. "This," she pointed to her chest. I looked at her again without looking down. "Look, you obviously don't like me being topless. I will put the veil back on." "Hey," I said defensively. "Hey, I'm fine. If that's how you want to be, that's fine with me. I'm sorry if I make you feel uncomfortable. My fault." She shook her head. "Are you all right? It's just, I think you know that I'm topless and trying so hard not to stare, it makes me feel bad. It's not a big deal to me, but if you get weird, I don't think we could keep hanging out." "I don't know what to tell you," I said. "I'm just trying to be respectful. Yes, she said. I understand and appreciate it, but I'm not very shy, so how about this? I will give you permission to look at me like I really look at you. Even squint. Satiate for about a minute. For the rest of the day, it won't be a big deal, and we can move on, okay? Will you let me take a closer look? I asked doubtfully. I don't know. This might be a bad idea. Fine. Don't let it. I'll ask you to look at me. In her eyes, I clearly still didn't look convinced. I beg you. I laughed briefly. I don't think there's any need for that. Please, she screamed, pretending to be pleading. Please, please look at my breasts. Look at them, please. Look at my breasts, Daddy. Okay, I said, teasing her, since you asked so nicely. I stopped trying not to look at her, and after briefly meeting her gaze, I lowered my gaze to her chest. Daddy, I said, looking at her. Did you call me Daddy? She giggled quietly. Sorry about that. I think it just rolled off the tongue. I guess when I beg a grown man, I call him Daddy. Who would have thought? Besides, you clearly enjoyed it. I looked away from her breasts and into her face, wondering what she meant. Her gaze was fixed between my legs. Damn, I said. Sorry. For what? She asked, truly surprised. I take this as a compliment. You worry too much. So, have you seen enough? Can we talk normally now? Of course, I said. It's already out of my system. Great, she said. Now take off your shirt. It should be fair. I laughed. I don't see how this is fair to you, but okay. It's hellishly hot. I pulled my t-shirt over my head and threw it on the sand next to me. My turn, she said, and began to carefully examine me. I'm not sure it was a fair deal. I was in good shape, but I was not a model. Okay, she said after a few moments. Everything is fair. Let's hang out. We spent the next few hours together on this beach. Sometimes they chatted, and sometimes they sat in light silence, looking at the water. It actually became easier after I looked at her. This meant I didn't have to be so careful where I looked. Of course, I looked at her body several times, and it often seemed like she was inviting me. It was already late when I sighed and let Millie know that it was time for me to leave. She pouted, but looking at the time on her phone, she agreed that it was time to leave. We both stood up, and just like yesterday, she came up to me and hugged me. I hadn't put on my shirt yet, and when she hugged me, her breasts were pressed against my chest. My arms hugged her. She rested her head on my shoulder as she hugged me. Her hair smelled like a mixture of sunscreen, floral shampoo, and sun. It was a little too much with her body pressed against mine, and I started to react. Thank you for another wonderful day, she said, looking at me. No, I said. Thank you. I had fun. Me too, she said and paused. Daddy, she said, finishing the sentence. You see, she said, laughing, you really like being called Daddy. She broke the hug and walked away, starting to gather her things. I'll let you go first again if you don't mind, she said. And see you tomorrow. Of course, I said. See you tomorrow. I felt very disappointed this evening. I cooked dinner for Lisa and myself, and we ate on the screened-in porch. Later, we lit a fire next to the cottage and watched the sun set over the lake. The sky and water put on a show, turning pink and orange, and then deep black. I thought for a moment how lovely and peaceful it was here as I sipped my beer. You're pretty quiet today, Lisa said. In her hand was a glass of cold white wine. Sorry, I said. I'm just taking it all in, you know. We heard quiet conversations and laughter around a communal fire in the center of the peninsula. It was a fire shared by all the houses, where people often gathered in the evening to socialize and get to know each other. Do you want to come join? Lisa asked, pointing in the direction of the sounds. I thought about it, but I was afraid that Millie might be there. This would probably be a bad idea, so I shook my head and told my wife that at least I wanted to stay home tonight. After some time, we saw a couple walking from the central fire along the path that passed by our house. When they came into the light of our fire, I saw that it was Millie and that guy, Marty. Millie was wearing a lot more clothes than any other time I'd seen her. She was wearing light black shorts with a white stripe on the sides and an oversized hoodie. Instinctively, I raised my hand to wave at her, but she quickly caught my eye and made a subtle shake of her head, almost inaudible. I changed the direction of my raised hand and scratched my beard instead. Then they passed by our sight. I wondered if Millie regretted what happened earlier. I knew I crossed a couple of lines today. It's one thing to spend all day with a young woman. If Lisa knew, she would probably ask questions about what I was doing or thinking. However, nothing really happened on the first day, so I thought it was pretty harmless. However, today openly staring at a girl was a different matter. We still didn't touch each other, but there was nothing non-sexual about it. I stared, and she exposed herself for me. Not very good. And then a hug. I really shouldn't have hugged topless women. This defied rational explanation. I made a mistake. I just had to make sure I didn't do it again. In fact, I decided that I would not go to the bay the next day. I'll swim in the opposite direction, perhaps up the river. I crushed my beer can and Lisa, and I went to bed. It's one thing to decide something while sitting in the dark next to your wife. It's quite another thing, as I discovered the next day, to follow it. I paddled back to Millie and I's private beach. That day was hot again. I didn't put on a t-shirt or tank top, and, to be honest with myself, I was hoping she'd be topless again. All night, I couldn't get the images of her perfect breasts out of my head. Taking long, steady strokes across the smooth water of the lake, I tried to understand what I was doing. What I wanted. Do I want to have sex with Millie? Certainly. She was young and sexy. Any man would like to take her for himself. She's probably not interested in me anyway. I was old enough to be her father. Of course, I thought about tearing off her bikini and having passionate sex with her. I wasn't made of stone. I, however, was happily married and didn't want to ruin my life. I had willpower. There was nothing stopping me from not going there and just jerking off to the memory of her. This would be the most correct decision. The truth was that, in addition to being physically attracted to her, I craved attention. For a guy my age, it was incredibly nice to have a young woman spending time with him. It was exciting. We had interesting conversations, and it was fun to flirt with her. It was incredible that she reciprocated. I was with Lisa for so long, many happy years, but in a long-term relationship, you don't get the chance to fall in love with each other for the first time. It's an exciting feeling when you meet someone and realize that you want them, realize that they want you too. The opportunity to follow that feeling, explore it, develop it, and act on it together. I didn't realize how much I enjoyed it and how long ago that feeling had faded. It felt like it was happening between Millie and me, and that was the feeling I was looking for this morning. As before, she was waiting for me, the same canoe on the beach. She must have been waiting for me because as soon as I appeared over the bank, she started waving. As I had hoped, she was topless and her breasts were swaying as she greeted me. I couldn't help but smile. I got out of the kayak and walked towards her. "Hi," I said, unable to resist examining her body. She leaned on her elbows, her breasts on perfect display for me. "Hello," she said, smiling at me. She was wearing large, square sunglasses. Today her bikinis were even smaller than before. "It's hot again," I said, sitting down next to her. I must admit, I was already excited just by the sight of her. "Yes," she said. "Too hot. I see you're shirtless. Nice." "You too," I said. "Nice too." "Thank you, sir," she said. She bit her lip, seeming to think about something. "Listen," she said. "I actually hate sunbathing in anything. I only wore these," she pointed to the bikini, "because you're here. But after yesterday, I guess it would be okay if I took them off. You do not mind?" I swallowed. No panties. That was another line not worth crossing. However, I nodded. "I think it's normal. If you feel comfortable," I said. "Great," she said. "I was afraid that I would have tan lines, and I hate them." "The thing is," she said, looking into my eyes, "I have a little problem. I just applied sunscreen." I blinked, momentarily disappointed that I didn't see it. I figured watching her rub the cream into her body would be incredibly sexy. "Okay," I said. To be honest, I don't understand what the problem is. Well, she said slowly, the fabric of these bikinis is prone to staining, and my hands are still greasy from the cream. I was thinking. She bit her lip before continuing. I was wondering if you could take them off me. I held my breath for a moment. Here, there was a line here that I definitely shouldn't cross. Apart from 2 brief hugs, we didn't touch each other. Even though I imagined my hands on her body, it didn't happen, and I knew, deep down, that it shouldn't happen. I think I could do it, I said, betraying myself. My heart was really pounding, both from self-loathing and anticipation. If you want. Yes, she said, without looking away. This is what I want. As I slowly reached forward, I noticed that my hand was shaking. From passion, from nervousness? Yes, from both. My fingers met the tie on her right thigh. I grabbed the loose cord and it unraveled, the bottom part falling onto the blanket underneath. I grabbed the other lace and untied the knot. I think I need to give you a chance to watch like yesterday, she said, her voice slightly hoarse, so that you don't get embarrassed and get distracted, right? I think it's a good idea, I said. I wasn't going to complain. But I think it should be fair, right? She said. It's not fair that you're still wearing shorts, is it? I swallowed. One more line. Can I get completely naked in front of this girl? Yes, but it was a mistake. A terrible mistake. I think so, I said, ignoring the part of my mind that warned me not to do it. She rose up a little and reached forward, grabbing the elastic waistband of my shorts. My eyes widened. I thought your hands were fat, I said. It looks like the sunscreen has already been absorbed, she said. Wow, Millie said. Beautiful, very beautiful. She looked into my eyes. So let's see, get this out of the system, yeah? I nodded and my eyes devoured her. She looked perfect lying underneath me. Her breasts glistened slightly in the sun, sweat and sunscreen giving them a shine. I think that's enough, right? I finally said, breaking the moment. I wanted this. I wanted it so bad, but I still had a shred of self-control left, and I grabbed onto it. He held on to her with the remaining strength and moved from her legs to the blanket next to her. I think so, she said. You're probably right. She sighed and rolled over, turning to face me. You probably think I'm terrible, she said. I know you're married and I have a boyfriend, and here I am, exposing myself to you. I shook my head. Hey, I said, I'm the one who's terrible. I'm actually married and old enough to be your father. I'm old enough to know better. I trailed off, not knowing what else to say. Yes, just. I know exactly what you mean. I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I like spending time with you, but I don't know. It is very difficult for me to remember that you have a wife and that I am busy. Actually, that's not true. I remember, but I don't care. This, I won't lie. This somehow turns me on quite a bit. I shook my head. I understand that, I said. I don't know what's going on, but I like it. Still, don't get me wrong, you're amazing, but I don't want to cheat on my wife. It was an absurd thing to say, lying naked with a young woman, having just shared this moment. By any standards, even though we didn't sleep, it could already be called cheating. I understand, she said. I respect that. I don't want you to do anything you don't want to do. I mean, I actually want you to do this. If you had started having sex with me at that moment, I wouldn't have stopped you. But I respect your boundaries. I'm sorry if you feel like I'm teasing you. No more than I'm teasing you, it seems, I said. I enjoy spending time with you, and I'm incredibly honored. But if you don't mind, I'd like to leave things as they are, okay? Certainly. I understand, she said. She reached out her hand and placed it on my arm, touching it lightly. I almost swore I felt an electric charge pass between us. Thank you for spending time with me, and thanks for being a good guy. Most men, well, they would do things differently. It's good that I'm not most men, I said, smiling. We relaxed, accustomed to the obvious sexual tension between us. We set boundaries on how things would work between us and seemed to be on the same page. We started chatting about different things. She told me about her childhood in the city, and I told her about my experience growing up in a small town. Even though we were both naked, the conversation flowed easily. That doesn't mean I ever forgot that she was an incredibly sexy young woman. Every time I looked at her, I was reminded of this. After a while, we stopped talking and started dozing in the sun. Millie moved a little and pushed me with her hand. "Okay," she said. "It's a strange request. Do you think, would you like to, I don't know, hug me?" I looked at her, very confused. I said. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Don't worry," she said. "I think we will succeed. You'll be the big spoon, and I'll be the little spoon. You made it clear. We won't change. I just—" She looked at me with eyes full of pleading that I couldn't resist. "I just want you to hug me. Please?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the voice inside me that would keep me sane, that would keep me from hugging her, would have kept me from going further down this path. "Of course," I said, betraying myself, betraying my wife and our relationship. "Just cuddles, no sex, okay?" "Okay," she said. "No sex. Now come here." It was so nice to feel her next to me. Our bodies were warmed by the sun, and this shared warmth seemed so right. Our breathing slowed and became even, but neither of us had any intention of falling asleep. I lightly ran my fingers over her shoulder and upper arm, and it made her tremble. "Sorry," I said. "No," she replied. "Do not stop. I like it." "So," she asked after a while, same question as before, "did you have any luck last night?" I smiled. "Unfortunately, no," I said. "It becomes less of a regular occurrence the longer you are with someone. And you?" She sighed. "Yes," she said. "I'm not sure if this can be called luck. Marty, let's just say he's not the most generous lover. He's a good guy, but a little jealous. I could turn a blind eye to it, but he, how shall I put it, doesn't have much stamina when it comes to sex." "It's sad," I said. "He doesn't know what he's missing." "It's true," she said. "How often do you please yourself?" I said. "Most days, every day, at least once." "You said that you and your wife are having less sex lately. Why? Are you not attracted to her?" "Of course I'm attracted. I think you saw her the other day. She's still beautiful, and when we have sex, we both have a lot of fun. It just ... it became less important to her. Much less is enough for her. So what can I do? I'm not going to force her to have sex more often. It wouldn't be fair." "Probably not," said Millie. "But it's too bad. I think you should have as much sex as you want. If she doesn't want to give it to you, you should be able to get it from someone who does." "That would be nice, I guess," I agreed, "but it doesn't quite work that way. How about you, since we ask? How often do you satisfy yourself?" She moved against me again. "So are you, I guess," she said. Most days more than once. It's hard. I have a pretty high sexual appetite, but Marty can't handle it very well." "It's hard to believe," I said. "With you." "What's wrong with me?" "Finish the thought, Grant," she said. "Well," I said carefully, "you're amazing. You look amazing and a wonderful person. He's lucky to be with you. He should take care of you. In every sense, including sexually." "He's too self-centered," she said. "This sucks," I said. "I'm sorry to hear it. He's missing the most important part of sex, partner's pleasure." "I'd like to think so," she sighed. "So I always sneak away while he's sleeping and either take a bath or sit on the sofa and caress myself. Last night." She paused and looked over her shoulder at me. "Do you mind me talking about this?" I nodded. "Last night was terrible. I was very excited. I've never shown myself to anyone the way I did to you yesterday. I've been seen naked many times, like by guys and so on, but yesterday I felt like I was exposing myself just for you. When you looked at me with such lust, I was so horny all day." I swallowed. She seemed so natural. I assumed she was just a free spirit. The idea that she was doing this show just for me, I could hardly believe it. I asked Marty to take me to the fire. I was hoping I'd see you there. I don't know what I expected to happen. I just wanted to see you again. You weren't there, but when we were walking home, I still saw you. You almost said hi. I saw it, and I should have stopped you. Not for any real reason. It's just, I wanted to keep you my secret. I wanted you to keep me as yours. The fact that we were with our partners, and we knew something they didn't know. I'm very excited right now. Maybe we shouldn't, I started to say, but she interrupted me. When we returned to our house, I almost attacked Marty. I really needed to have sex. He was surprised, but we went to bed. I felt weirdly jealous thinking about Marty having sex with his girlfriend. I had no rights to Millie, but the thought of this incompetent guy made me angry. He used a condom. He always uses it. I told him that I'm on pills and it's not necessary, but he says it's better to be safe than sorry. I fucking hate condoms. I was so damn angry. I understand, was all I could say. Do you want to know what I did next? She asked in a quiet voice. Yes, I said. Tell me, Millie. I started to satisfy myself. Millie, I said. She interrupted me again. It's okay, she said. I couldn't help but nod my head. I couldn't help it at that moment. I lightly kissed her shoulder. My beard and my lips made her quiver against me, and she arched back into my body. I kissed along the line of the shoulder and up the neck. But then we lost control of our bodies and had sex. Finally, I collapsed back, and she fell on top of me. Damn it, I muttered. What the hell, Millie? Sorry, Daddy, she said in a quiet voice. I needed it. Damn, I moaned. Grant, she said. Sorry, I grabbed my shorts and quickly put them on. No, I said angrily. It's my fault. I let it go too far. Damn it. I was angry. Angry at her for taking advantage of me when I didn't expect it. Angry at myself for letting this happen. I stopped and lowered my head for a moment before shaking it and grabbing the rest of my things. I just need to leave. You better leave too. Wait, she said, but I was already getting into my kayak and setting off. She called my name again, but I had already rounded the edge of the bay and was heading back to the resort. I felt terrible the rest of the day. Lisa noticed something was wrong and asked about it. I'm reluctant to admit it, but I snapped at her, demanding that she just leave me alone. She left and sat on the beach until evening. I was seething inside. How could I let things go this far? At every step I had to stop. I shouldn't have hugged her, letting her be naked next to me while I looked at her. It was a mistake. Even when I met her on the first day, I should have just said hi and left. All these mistakes, all mine. Poor girl. She clearly needed something. And since she called me daddy, it was clear exactly what. Some father, an older man who would pay attention to her. It was too bad, but I couldn't give it to her. I was married. She needed to find someone else. Did I really want her to find someone else? No, of course not. And that was also a problem. She wasn't mine. I had no right to it. The more I thought I was entitled, the worse it would get. I had to stop this. I decided not to go kayaking again this week. I'll just sit on the beach and read books like my wife. I will no longer expose myself to risky situations, and I will stop leading the poor young girl by the nose. Having made this decision, I quickly took a shower and went to apologize to my wife. It took some sweet words, but she eventually forgave me. I told her I received an email from work and made a mistake by reading it. I said that someone had ruined the deal I had been working on for months. I apologized for snapping at her. It was a good lie. She took the job very seriously and would react the same way. She asked if I wanted to go to the fire that evening after dinner. I sighed. I didn't really want to, but I couldn't tell my wife why. If Millie had been there, things could have gone awry. But having argued with her before, I had no right to say no. We ate a simple dinner of burgers I had grilled and headed to the central fire pit as the sun set. My stomach was in knots. I was afraid Millie would be there. It was so easy for her to ruin my life. A small conversation with Lisa, and everything would have collapsed. A few words and my wife would have known that I had had sex with Millie earlier that day. The fire was larger than the ones near the cottages, surrounded by 4 thick logs for seating. The seating logs were about 4 feet long, sufficient for 4 people. Someone had already built a fire, and there were 2 other couples there, and 3 or 4 children were running around. I was relieved to see that Millie or Marty weren't there. Lisa brought a bottle of wine, and I took several bottles of beer in my bag. Other couples were also drinking wine and greeted us when we arrived. They seemed to know each other a little, having spent previous evenings around the fire, but they easily accepted us into their circle. These were light, superficial conversations, but quite pleasant. As the evening progressed, another couple joined us, and all 4 logs were occupied by people. Again, I was glad Millie stayed away. I began to relax, although I was still not in the mood for communication. I was polite but silent. Lisa, however, was deep in conversation with the couple on the right. I sat to Lisa's left, looking at the fire and sipping a beer. The sun had already set and darkness had fallen. The nocturnal insects made their sounds. The fire crackled and cast shadows around when someone sat down on a log next to me. I glanced and my heart sank. Millie was next to me and her boyfriend was on the other side. What? Behind? Crap. She could have chosen any other place. It was madness and dangerous. Millie wore a spaghetti-strap tank top and short gym shorts, showing off her legs. I saw bra straps next to tank straps. I realized that this was the first time I had seen her in a bra. Millie and Marty had already met everyone else earlier, so they were greeted warmly. They turned to my wife and me. "Hey, buddy," Marty said, reaching across Millie to shake mine. "Marty." I shook his hand firmly. Am I squeezing a little harder than necessary? Maybe. As my fingers wrapped around him, I couldn't help but think about the same hand caressing his girlfriend's breast earlier that day. I'm ashamed to admit, but instead of guilt, I felt satisfaction. "Grant," I said, looking him in the eye. "Nice to meet you." Millie looked at me. I saw her eyes dance in the firelight, a small smile at the edge of her lips. I was really sweating with excitement. She extended her hand for a handshake. "Hi," she said. "I'm Millie." I swallowed and took her soft hand in mine. "I'm Grant," I said. "This is Lisa." Millie looked at my wife, slowly releasing my hand, lightly, secretly running her fingers along the skin on the inside of my wrist. It was like electricity when we touched it. Lisa paused her conversation with the couple on her right and shook hands with the new arrivals. It was strange to see my wife and Millie touching each other. It seemed that something might explode and destroy everything, but the moment passed. Lisa went back to talking with her new friends while Marty chatted with the couple on the left. Millie was silent, looking at the fire. I was incredibly aware of her presence next to me. I couldn't think about anything else, and all the conversations around me became a quiet background. I was wearing a red and black plaid flannel shirt with the collar open and the sleeves rolled up and loose linen shorts. I felt Millie's smooth leg pressing against mine. I tried not to look at her, but just her presence next to me greatly influenced me. The weather on the lake in August was strange. It could be hot during the day, but at night the temperature dropped. So after an hour, it got pretty cool. One of the couples announced that they were cold and went to a wooden chest nearby and took out woolen blankets. "Looks like there are only 4 of them," said the husband. "Looks like we'll have to share." I blinked. It was a mistake. I said, "I don't think it's that cold. Maybe we can do without the blanket." Lisa looked at me with irritation. "What are you talking about?" "I'm cold," she said. "We'll take one." "I'm cold too," Millie said next to me. "You see," said Lisa, getting up and taking the blanket. She brought it and spread it along the entire length, covering Marty, Millie, me, and herself. "Don't think only about yourself, Grant." She sat down again, and the blanket covered us all. It was a little prickly and smelled of smoke from many fires. I didn't pay much attention to it, focusing more on the young woman's bare leg pressed against mine. I glanced at Millie and saw that she was still looking at the fire. She drank wine with her left hand, and her right hand was under the blanket. I swallowed the lump in my throat. To my credit, I didn't cry out when her hand slid to my thigh, soft fingers brushing against my skin. It was close, but I held back. I glanced at her and saw that she was looking at me from the corner of her eye, with a small smile on her lips. I shook my head slightly, trying to tell her no, but she ignored me. "Grant," Lisa said at that moment, and I turned my head towards her, afraid that she had noticed. "What was the name of that French restaurant we went to last month? These people want to go there." I said, embarrassed. "Right, it was. I don't remember." "Come on," said Lisa. "It was kind of like home. Do you remember? You remember names better than me." It was difficult to concentrate. "Exactly. Mason. Rouge, I think. Because of the red wallpaper, I finally remembered." "Exactly," said Lisa, beaming. "Exactly. They had the best foie gras I've had in a long time." My wife returned to her new friends and forgot about me again. I looked at Marty, and he was deep in conversation with the man next to him. They seemed to be talking about cars. I looked at Millie, who was looking to the left, pretending to be interested in her partner's conversation, but her hand began to subtly stroke me. It was stupid, I know, to put my hand under the blanket and grab her hip. I didn't even want her hand on me in this situation. Why would I do the same? I obviously didn't think about it. Marty looked over his shoulder, but luckily looked at her face and not at the place where her hand disappeared under the covers. "Are you okay, honey?" he asked, not realizing what was happening. "Yes," she answered quietly, "just shaking." However, for me it was like a bucket of cold water poured on my face. It was madness and dangerous. I had to stop this. I turned to my wife and spoke quietly to her. "Listen," I said, "after that letter today, I'm not in the mood for this tonight. Do you want to come back?" "Okay," she whispered back. "I don't want to leave, but you should. Maybe you can get some sleep. I'll be back a little later." I sighed. When Lisa started talking, it was difficult for her to stop. I knew she would probably stay by the fire until the last people had left. "Okay," I said. "See you later." "Good night," I said over my shoulder, quickly leaving. It was probably pretty rough, but I needed to get out of there. I hurried along the path to our cottage. The resort lined the path with solar lanterns that stuck into the ground. They were cheap and unreliable, and half of them didn't light up, but they provided enough dim light for me to continue on my way. The trees were thick and closely surrounded the path. "Grant," came a voice from behind. Of course it was Millie. I ignored her and continued walking, reaching for what I hoped could be safety, away from danger and temptation. I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me, almost running to catch up. "Grant," she called too loudly. I turned to face her. I was breathing heavily. My dick was still hard as I watched her rush towards me with her face flushed. "What?" I said sharply to her. "What do you want, Millie? Do you want me to get caught? Do you want to ruin my life?" She stopped, standing a few feet away from me, breathing heavily. "No," she said. "Of course not. I was careful." "No, damn it, I wasn't," I said, my voice an angry hiss. "The caution would be to keep your hands to yourself." Now she was starting to get angry too. I saw it in her eyes. The way her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Oh, as if you didn't like it," she spat. "Where was your hand? She didn't hug your wife, did she?" I took 2 steps towards her. "Don't talk about my wife," I said. "Oh, go to hell," she said. I saw tears in the corners of her eyes. "Don't act like such a saint. Are you trying to pretend you're not involved in this? It's like you have no control." I took 2 more steps towards her and was now very close, breathing heavily, with clenched teeth, very angry. At her? To myself? Most likely on both. "I know what I did," I said. "I know this too well. Are you some kind of bitch?" My words were cruel and angry, meant to hurt her. I was actually angry at her, but the anger and disgust was mostly directed at myself. I just took it out on her. "Yes," she said, almost screaming again. I grabbed her hand, my fingers squeezing her bicep. Not so loud, I growled. Yes, I'm a bitch, she continued, more quietly. I may not have been her before I met you, but now I am. I'm your bitch. I couldn't help but touch you by the fire. This is crazy, I said. I realized that I was holding her hand tightly, my fingers digging into the flesh, but I didn't let her go. You can't be so careless. I can't control this, she said, and a tear ran down her cheek. Ever since we had sex. Something in me broke then. Some edge I was balancing on collapsed beneath me, and I pulled on her hand, pulling her closer to me, pressing my mouth to hers. She moaned and kissed me back, running her hands through my hair. I broke the kiss and looked around. Even in my frantic state, I knew it was too open. I pulled her by the arm and pulled her out of the way. There was a small clearing a few feet away from the bushes. It was very dark, and I could only see her face in front of mine. We again had sex. I shook my head. Once again, I've gone too far. But did I regret it? Not a bit. I walked up to her and kissed her. We stood there kissing for a minute before I ended the relationship. I don't know what you told your boyfriend, but I need to go to my cabin, I said. Oh, she said, looking around. Me too. I told him that the sun used to give me headaches. I'll have to hurry. I don't think he'll be there too late. I pulled on the discarded shorts and handed her her own. We can discuss this tomorrow, okay? I said. Okay, she said. Tomorrow. Good night, Daddy. I kissed her again, briefly, and then hurried to my cabin. I was almost hoping for rain the next day. Then I'll have an excuse to stay in the cabin and avoid talking to Millie. However, when I woke up, the sun was shining hotly, and I knew there was no way to avoid it. The night before, when I got home, I took a quick shower to wash off the stink of sex, and by the time Lisa returned, I was already in bed. She wished me good night and hoped that I would be in a better mood the next day. I promised I would, and we both left. I'm not sure what she was thinking, but I replayed the day's events over and over in my head. The next day, I left earlier than usual. I was surprised that it was only Tuesday. This week, it felt like time was stretching, but at the same time, it felt like it was moving quickly. Vacations are like that. I wondered if Millie would come for me this time, but when I approached the cove, she was there, clearly waiting for me. I waved as I walked in, and she stood up and walked over to where I had beached my kayak. She looked, as always, amazing. Topless and red bikini bottoms, of course. Her wonderful breasts swayed as she walked towards me, swaying her hips. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun on top of her head. I couldn't help but smile when I saw her. Hey, Daddy, she said as she walked up to me and then jumped towards me. When we finally broke the kiss, I looked at her face. Hello, I said, smiling. She sat down next to me and then lay down with her head on my lap. She smiled at me. I thought it might be a little easier to chat if I took care of you first. I hope you don't mind, she said, grinning slyly. Well, I said sadly, I definitely can't complain. It was very welcoming. You're right, though. We need to talk. She sighed. I know, she said, but I'll tell you right now that I won't accept you telling me you don't want this. You've proven time and time again that you want to, so don't lie to me. I leaned over and stroked her damp hair. Okay, said inside. You are right. I want you. How could I not? You're so damn sexy. I enjoy spending time with you. But I'm also not lying when I tell you that I love my wife. I don't want to change anything there, so that's a problem. Of course, she said. I understand. I don't want to ruin your life, and I'm not stupid. I just want to be with you. I don't mind you getting married. Listen, I know it's bad, but I've always liked busy men. I find it sexy. I know it makes me feel terrible. Just let me. Let me be yours. That's what I want. I'll be careful. You weren't very careful last night, I said. It was completely reckless. She smiled slightly. Right, you are right. I'm really sorry. I needed you. I'm not sure how much control I had over the situation. I think I lost control more than anything. I know, she said, and it was damn hot. Isn't it? Isn't it so hot? I thought for a moment. It was. It was stupid and crazy and, yeah, one of the hottest things that has ever happened to me. Certainly. But it's too risky. If we continue, we won't be able to do this anymore. Promise me. She pretended to pout. I sighed as I looked at the beautiful young woman whose head lay in my lap. I had to be honest with myself. I had no way to stop it, but I really didn't want to. Yes, I said, we'll figure it out. We stayed like that for a while. Her eyes were closed, and she was smiling. I looked at the water. So, I said after a while, Dad, what happened to this? I don't know, she said. I mean, I think it's sexy to call an older guy while we're having fun. I think it's some kind of problem with my father, but my father and I have a pretty good relationship. We remained silent for some time. I have bad news, she said after a while. She looked at me and I raised an eyebrow. We are leaving tomorrow afternoon. This is our last day on this beach. I swallowed. This was news. I didn't take into account that Millie might stay with me for a shorter period than I did. Lisa and I left on Sunday. This is crap, I said. I should have been happy. With Millie gone, the risk of being caught has also increased. However, I didn't feel that way. I could already feel a pit in my stomach disappearing just thinking about it. I already felt bad. Yes, she said, this is crap. And also why I needed us to have sex last night. We have so little time, I didn't want to waste a minute. We started slowly, enjoying the sensations. I can't believe you're leaving tomorrow, I finally said. God, it was amazing. She moved so that she was lying next to me, resting her head on my chest. She ran her fingers over my naked body. We spent hours relaxing that day, hugging, kissing, talking, and even swimming. The last time we had sex was late in the evening. This time it was gentle and slow. We enjoyed each other as if for the last time. That day we spent too long on the beach, and each did not want to let the other go. Finally, it was too late, and we could put off the inevitable no longer. I pulled her towards me for one last kiss, hugging her tightly. I don't want to go, I said. Not really. I know, she said, her voice a little sad. But we both know you have to. I have your number. I'll text you as soon as you get back to town. We'll figure something out. I swam away, looking over my shoulder. She was on the shore and waving at me. I waved back and the kayak carried me offshore, out of her sight. The rest of my stay at the cottage was uneventful. Lisa was a little worried that I was late that last day with Millie, but I told her I was exploring the river and she agreed. I tried not to get depressed and miss my wife, not miss the young woman I just met, and I hope I succeeded. If she noticed anything, she didn't tell me about it. During the last few days of my vacation, I still kayaked but avoided the bay. It didn't seem right to go without her to the place that had become Millie and me. I explored the shores of the lake, just as I had intended before I met the girl. I spent a lot of time thinking about what I did. It was exciting, and the thought of sex with Millie never left my mind. However, over time, the truth was revealed to me. There was no way this was going to work moving forward. I was too busy with work and my life with Lisa. Millie was a young girl with her whole life ahead of her. I would only be wasting her time, get in her way. By the time I packed up the car and left the cottage, I had decided to break up with Millie as soon as we got back to town, to free her and myself. I walked around the car, getting ready to get into it. Lisa was already sitting in the passenger seat and choosing music when I received a message. Instinctively, I opened it. Of course, it was from Millie. It was a photograph, and my finger trembled as I opened it. It was an intimate photo. I look forward to your return home, it read. I swallowed and closed the phone. Who was that? Lisa asked as I got into the car a few moments later. She seemed almost uninterested. Work, I said. They're already telling me I'll have to work late this week to make up for lost time. Looks like I'll probably see Millie again. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.